Hello friends, and welcome back to the Hall of Craft. So today I have a painting video for you guys, and specifically I'm going to be painting the Blacksting Wyvern from the Reaper Bones 4 Kickstarter. It was an add-on that I got and ordered it over a year and a half ago, and it just recently came in the last couple months, and I've been really excited to put some paint on this bad boy, so that's what I'm doing today. So I'm going to list all the colors that I'm using so you can follow along if that's the kind of thing you're into. Hopefully you find this, inspirational or educational, and you can take some of these techniques and apply them to your own projects. So let's just jump right into it, and I'll show you how I got them from nothing to finished. So here's all the paints that I used. Feel free to pause the video if you want to write these down or whatever. I used all Reaper paints and then some Citadel washes. So starting off with Blacksting, I have already primed him and assembled him and removed the mold lines and gap filled. I'm going to start by painting him with coal black. I'm going to hit all the areas that are kind of skin, not the wings or spikes or whatever. So the original plan here was inspired by a next level painting video that he recently put up, where he was doing comic book style blue highlights on a black character. So I wanted to try and replicate that, but I did what I typically do when trying a new technique, and I just went way too hard with it. So he stopped looking like a black character with blue highlights and just started looking like a blue character. So I'm basically taking all three of my blues and just kind of mixing them up in the dirty pot with the coal black and getting progressively lighter. Overall, I'm happy with the way the highlights turned out. It just wasn't exactly the effect that I had in my mind when I started out, so I just started rolling with it and turning this guy into something different. So once the blues are done, I'm just going to take some muddy brown and just hit all of the leathery areas on him. So this is going to be the top and bottoms of his wings, his stomach, and down the center of his tail to about the midpoint. If you're watching this and thinking, wow, you're applying way too much paint, it's way too slick, that's because I had a problem with my airbrush. In between these clips, I totally disassemble my airbrush and clean it entirely. I had a big clog that was causing the paint to just fly out at full pressure. So I think I noticed that about here, and so I had some drippage on his wings. So here I just mixed a bunch of golden brown and orange together to try and get like that orange tone in his wings, and it was going on way too thick, so here's where I notice that there's a problem. So after disassembling, I come back and kind of clean it up and re-smooth out my transitions and kind of remove all of those dripping areas. So I'm just adding progressively lighter colors and a little more orange to the pot, and eventually turning into like a white leather color. Really watering down the paint too, just trying to make a very gradual transition. And I'm not too worried about spray hitting the blue areas, because like I said before, I didn't really intend them to be that blue in the first place, and my washes are going to dull this down quite a bit. I really want a natural transition from like the leather color on his wings to the tones on his body. So after I'm done airbrushing, when I'm happy with that transition, I'm just going to take my brush out and use some of the original sapphire blue color that I used on his body and just kind of re-establish those areas on the stalks of his wings and on his back, and just any kind of areas where I really sprayed over with the airbrush. So I'm going to do a second coat of that because my first coat of the blue was pretty thinned. I'm also going to hit the kind of fat parts of his neck to try and reestablish that dark area. So here, to try and fix the blue problem I was having, I decided that putting a green wash on all of the blue areas might kind of bring it more to an area that I was happy with. So I did a bit of a test area on his tail and then let it dry and decided that I actually really liked that look. The kind of green wash over the blue tones really gave him this kind of aqua shade that I was really happy with. So I decided I was going to pivot and put that everywhere. So I haven't thinned this wash at all. Often I do cut my washes with blow improver, but for this step I'm just using it at full strength out of the bottle. So I'm just being very careful not to get this on the underside of the wings. I do blend it in on the top stalks, but on the understalks I just want it to be in the middle, not on any of that exposed flap. So here I'm going to use the green to blend, kind of make it look a little more natural, like it doesn't just go from stalk to the wing, because I find that creatures with wings, the upper sides of their wings are darker than the undersides. So I figured now would be a good time to paint the inside of his mouth before I get too carried away. So I've just mixed some blood red and some the breast cancer pink together. I find it usually gives a pretty nice shade for the insides of the mouths. So now I'm taking a bone shadow color and I'm just hitting all of the areas on him that I want to look like horns or just, you know, horn-like areas. I find he has this area up on his upper shoulders that just looks like it should be made out of like natural plate. This bone shadow color has a lot of kind of green tones in it, I'm fine, so it's a very good bridge between the green of his scales and the browns of his leather. Really happy with how that transition kind of naturally came together. So once that's dry, I'm going to come back with a aged bone color, which is going to be very, very bright by comparison, but I'm putting it on pretty thin, and I'm just putting it on the top of the areas that I hit with the bone shadow. Going to let the bone shadow do its job and be the undercoat, but the aged bone is going to be kind of the highlight on these. and then I'm gonna wash all this once I'm done, and that'll kind of bring it back down. But this is gonna work really nicely to make all those spined areas just pop off. Just really bring a lot of detail that's just naturally in the sculpt out. I'm really happy with this step. This is usually when a mini starts coming together for me. When I start putting on the highlight details, I get really excited about where I'm going with it. I'm also going to use this for his teeth. Making sure to leave a lot of that gum color at the top. One thing I find is people put the teeth going right up to the edge of the mouth, but things always look a little gnarlier if they have some gums. Okay, so once that's dry, I'm going to mix together some Nuln Oil and Earthshade with some Flow Improver. Equal parts of those two washes and then the Flow Improver, just to kind of thin it out because I don't want to make it too dark. And I'm going to put that all over everything I hit with the Aged Bone color. So all of his spines and claws and his mouth. And I'm also going to hit the leathery parts of his body with this. So that would be his belly and his wings. I'm also going to put some inside his mouth to try and darken up those dark areas. One really good thing that this step does is it blends that green that I put coming out of his stalks on the top side into the leather in a really nice way. So the green by itself is a little bit harsh, but with this extra wash it kind of mixes together and naturally blends those colors. So I've thinned this out so it's not so dramatic, but his wings have a lot of dimples on them. So one step that I do here that may or may not make it into the final cut here is I take a wet brush and just dip it in water and then blend in those areas. So I really don't want too much pooling because it sit in those dimples and just make him look like he's kind of got leopard spotted wings, which was not the look I was going for. Wanted a natural transition. So here it is, he's mostly dry and I'm just kind of dipping my brush in water and kind of smoothing out some of those areas. Be very careful when you do this, don't press too hard, because if you do, the wet brush will pull your paint back off the model and then you'll start seeing the black from the primer all the way at the bottom. So you kind of undo all your hard work if you get too aggressive here, but the step is worth it if done properly. Okay, so now that that's all dry, I'm going to come back with a dry brush, basically, of my aged bone, and I'm going to just kind of reestablish some of those highlights on all of his horns and bone areas and teeth and claws. Really, really subtle dry brush, not overly aggressive, because if you go too hard, there's no point in washing it in the first place. So with the theme of this build, I'm kind of going a step further than I normally would. So generally speaking, I would kind of leave it there, but I'm going to come in with a leather white now and do an even subtler dry brush on just the very tips of all of his bones and spines and horns and claws. So I want to do some edge highlighting on his scales. He has these really awesome, like plate-like scales on his tail and his back, and I just wanted to kind of establish those as call them out at least with a good highlight. So I've gone a little bit thick here because this is a technique that I don't do very often, but trying to practice it. So I mixed together some of my original greens and blues and made this kind of aqua highlight color that looks like it could match on his body from the green wash and the blue. And I'm just edge highlighted his tail and then dry brushed kind of center mass highlights on his body. So like the tops of his thighs, the middle of his neck, the top of his face, and kind of the arm-like wing areas. So while those edge highlights are drying, I'm going to apply a green wash to his stingers. And then I'm going to dip my brush in water and just kind of pull it off of the edges. I don't want it to be too dramatic, just subtle. Then I'm going to mix up another highlight, even brighter than before, and just put it on the most bright areas that I've already dry brushed, just to take it one step further. And then I will take that color and apply another edge highlight. This one much more subtle, much more fine than the first one. Just really want to define that scale area on his tail. Okay, so he has these little poison sacs on his tail beside the stinger, and I really want to make these look dynamic. So what I'm going to try and do is make them look almost like gems, where they have like very, very black, dark areas and then very, very bright white areas, all on kind of a green backdrop. So the first step, I've taken my darkest green and just kind of applied it to the whole thing. And now in my wet palette, I'm going to be blending darker and lighter greens onto these to try and give them like a bright, glowing look almost. So I've thinned these paints down quite a bit, and I'm just wet blending them as I apply. Focusing with lighter colors at the bottom and then darker colors at the top. So here I've just taken some pure black and I'm tracing them so that they can kind of pop off the rest of the tail a little more. So as that kind of dries up a little bit, I'm going to take some pure white and just give these little shine highlight at the top and then a little bit at the bottom as well. Just to try and go for as much contrast as possible. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to move on to his eyes. I'm just going to use some oranges here and thin it down and go for a bunch of thin coats to try and get it covered. And then once it is covered, I'm going to move to a brighter orange and give them a highlight, and then eventually a white dot. These yellow and orange tones are really going to pop off all the blues and greens I've been using for the rest of his body. Okay, so now that I'm happy with how Blacksting has turned out, I might as well finish his base off. So I'm going to go with like a earth tone for his base. I'm just going to really water that down and apply a couple of thin coats to just get solid coverage. plan on going for like a desert-ish look with these, so I'm just using the earth as a base. And then for all of the stones and the ruins that he's perched himself on, I'm using a mahogany brown as the base. And these are going to be the darkest this gets. I am only going to make them brighter from here, and this is just going to be kind of the undertone for the stone and the earth, with all of that kind of sandiness applied on top. So I'm not thinning the mahogany as much as I did the earth tone because I don't want it to drip and fall everywhere. Given the verticalness of this piece, I want it to stay where I put it. Being very, very careful to not undo any of the hard work that we've done on Blacksting already. Okay, so once that's dry, I'm going to take a golden brown and just start dry brushing all of it. This is going to look a little intense at first, but the brighter we make this color, the less intense it will be, ironically. Just making sure to be doing a very, very dry brush so there's no streaking. And I'm just going to start progressively adding more and more white tones. I think I'm using a leather white here to the mixture on my dry brush. So I start with the golden brown and I add more and more leather white, and I just progressively start increasing and increasing this tones, focusing on the higher areas as I get lighter. So once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to mix up a brown wash with some flow improver, and I'm just going to coat all of the base and the perch. Just really want to bring out some of those details and increase the contrast between the highlights and the lowlights. Once I've applied that, I'm just going to start dipping my brush in water and kind of pulling off some of the cooling areas because I don't want it to look like coffee stained. So leave that for quite a while to dry, and then I'm going to mix up another highlight and dry brush the areas again, because the wash kind of removes some of your highlighted areas, which is good in some circumstances, but I want this to look a little brighter, so I'm going back in and kind of re-establishing some of those highlights with another dry brush. The brighter I make it, the more I just focus on the tops and the edges of the stone. And there he is. So the last step of painting is just to give him a border. I like to paint the base, the edge of the base, with just a pure black. And while that's drying, I figure I'm going to add some grass tufts to them. So I'm just going to start putting some drops of super glue on areas where I think there could be some grass. I'm going to use some summer grass for the interior, I guess. And then I'm going to use more of a dead grass look, kind of branching out from that summer grass, because that bright green's a little intense, and I want this to look a little bit more like wasteland. So I'm just looking around, picking out areas that I think would look good with a grass tuft, and then putting them on with a pair of tweezers and leaving them to dry. And there it is. And that's it, friends. That's all there is to this video. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. I decided to spend just a little bit longer on the paint job than I normally do because I wanted to take it just a step above what I normally do. So feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd love to read you guys' techniques and your tips and tricks. You guys have so much knowledge and I just want to take it and bring it and put it in my own brain. So keep doing that. Give me a thumbs up if you had a good time. I'd really appreciate that. It helps out the channel a lot. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and subscribe if you want to see some more content like this. But let's be real, if you're still here, you probably already are. I see you guys. Appreciate you. I'll see you guys in the next video.